Okay, so good afternoon all. We, the students of Tamil Nadu National Law University, will be presenting a webinar on the behalf of the Youth Empowerment Foundation. The main theme of the webinar will be domestic violence. The National Commission for Women, which receives complaints from across the country regarding violence against women, has recorded a more than twofold rise in gender-based violence since the lockdown was implemented to prevent the spread of the coronavirus. Domestic violence is not a brand new issue surfacing worldwide, but has existed for years in the society. Although the Constitution of India ensures equality of all, but the position of women and children has always been an intricate one, and they have been considered as being subordinate creatures. So, in today's webinar, we will be discussing about the issue of domestic violence, the types of domestic violence, the after effects on the victims, legal approach, and the impact of COVID-19 on families. Now, I'll be introducing the names of the presenters. Priyanjali Priyadarshini, Abhishek S., Vemuri Fani Pragneya, Shanmalar M., and Vignesh Raj. So, domestic violence. Domestic violence is not physical violence alone. It can be defined as a pattern of abusive behavior by one or both persons in an intimate relationship, such as marriage, family, friendship, or cohabitation. It is a pattern of coercive, controlling behavior that is a pervasive, life-threatening crime affecting people in all our communities, regardless of the gender, age, sexual orientation, race, ethnicity, and social standing. The victims are usually women, followed by children. Domestic violence takes various forms, both physical and mental abuse. Now, I'll be discussing the forms of domestic violence. When the general public thinks about domestic violence, we usually think in terms of physical assault that result in visible injuries to the victim. However, this is only one type of abuse. There are several categories of abusive behavior, each of which has its own devastating consequences. Lethality involved with physical abuse may place the victim at a higher risk, but the long-term destruction of personhood that accompanies the other forms of abuse is significant and cannot be minimized. The various forms of domestic violence are control, physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse and intimidation, isolation, verbal abuse, which includes coercion, threats, and blame, using male privilege, and economic abuse. Now, I'll be discussing these issues broadly. Control. Controlling behavior is a way for the batterer to maintain dominance over the victim. The belief that they are justified in the controlling behavior and the resultant abuse is the core issue in abuse of people. It is often subtle, almost always insidious, and pervasive. Examples of controlling behavior are monitoring phone calls or not allowing the victim to make or receive phone calls, not allowing the freedom of choice in terms of lifestyle of the victim, invading the victim's privacy by not allowing personal time or space of their own, forcing or encouraging their dependency by making the victim believe that they are incapable of surviving or performing simple tasks without the batterer or on their own, using the children to control the victim parent by using the children as spies, threatening to kill, hurt, or kidnap the children, physical or sexual abuse of the children. Now, I'll be discussing about physical violence. Physical violence is any physically aggressive behavior, withholding of physical needs, indirect physically harmful behavior, or threat of physical abuse. Examples: hitting, slapping, pushing, punching, beating, hitting with an object, threatening with a weapon, etc. all can constitute of physical abuse. Withholding of physical needs of the victim, including interruption of sleep or meals, denying food, money, transportation, or help if the victim is sick or injured. Abusing or injuring the victim or threatening to injure others, like the children, pets, or social property. Holding the victim hostage is also a form of physical abuse. Sexual abuse. Sexual abuse involves using sex in an exploitative fashion or forcing sex on another person. Sexual abuse may involve both physical and verbal behavior. Example, making the victim have sex with others, having unwanted sexual experiences, or getting the victim involuntarily involved in prostitution. Exploiting a victim who is unable to make an informed decision about involvement in sexual activity because of being asleep, drugged, disabled, too young, too old, or dependent upon or afraid of the perpetrator. Laughing or making fun of the victim's sexuality or body, or name calling in relation to the victim's sexual preferences or behavior, making contact with the victim in any non consensual way, including unwanted penetration or touching, having affairs with other people, and using that information to taunt the victim, even withholding sex from the victim as a control mechanism, is a kind of sexual abuse. Emotional abuse and intimidation. Emotional abuse is any behavior that exploits another's vulnerability, insecurity, or character. Such behaviors include continuous degradation, intimidation, manipulation, brainwashing, or control of another to the detriment of the individual. Example, insulting or criticizing to undermine the victim's self confidence. This includes public humiliation as well as actual or threatened rejection. Consistently disregarding, ignoring, or neglecting the victim's requests and needs, forcing the victim to take drugs or alcohol, not allowing the victim to practice their religious beliefs, isolating the victim from their religious community, or using religion as an excuse for abuse, using any form of coercion or manipulation which is disempowering to the victim. Isolation. Isolation is an outcome of many kinds of abusive behaviors. By keeping the victim from seeing who they want to see, doing what they want to do, or controlling how the victim thinks and feels, the abuser is isolating the victim from the resources which may help the victim leave the relationship. Isolation often begins as an expression of love for the victim, with statements like, "If you really loved me, you would want to spend time with me and not with your family." As it progresses, the isolation expands, limiting or excluding the victim's contact with anyone but the batterer. Eventually, the victim is left totally alone and without the internal and external sources to change their life. Some victims isolate themselves from existing resources and support systems because of the shame of bruises or other injuries, the abuser's behavior in public, or the abuser's treatment of friends or family. Verbal abuse. Verbal abuse is any abusive language used to denigrate, embarrass, or threaten the victim. Example, threatening to kill or hurt the victim or her children, family, pets, property, or reputation. Name calling, such as ugly, bitch, or stupid. Telling the victim they are unattractive or undesirable. Yelling, screaming, terrorizing, or refusing to talk to the victim is also a kind of verbal abuse. Using male privilege. As long as we as a culture accept and tolerate violence against women, men will continue to be abusive. Abhishek, can you please change the slide to using male privilege? Yeah, thank you. The elimination of sexism, the end of cultural supports for violence, and the adoption of a system of beliefs and values embracing equality and mutuality in intimate relationships will end men's violence against women. There are four stereotypes that are responsible for violence against women: objectification of women and the belief that women exist for the satisfaction of men's personal, emotional, sexual, and physical needs; an entitlement to male authority with the right and obligation to control, coerce, or punish her independence; the belief that the use of physical force is acceptable, appropriate, and effective; societal support for male dominance, controlling, and assaulting behavior. By failing to intervene aggressively against the abuse, the culture condones the violence. Economic abuse. Financial abuse is a way to control the victim through manipulation of economic resources. Some kinds of economical abuse are controlling the family income and either not allowing the victim access to money or rigidly limiting their access to family funds, causing the victim to leave a job or preventing them from taking up a job, spending money on necessities such as food, rent, utilities, on the non-essential items such as drugs, alcohol, and hobbies, all constitute of economic abuse. So now I'll be handing over the further presentation to my friend.
Very good afternoon, all. I'm Abhishek, and I'll be dealing with the victims who are subjected to the abuse. So I'll be proceeding with the aspects, the main aspect that concentrate on victims who have been subjected to violence and abuse by anyone. So there always existed violence all over the global fraternity, and it prevails in the contemporary world as well. The domestic violence is a very subjective term, rather quite respective, and the violence is always tested to the subjective terms of it. And it remains uncodified in a retrospective manner across the land. The victims of domestic violence are not from any one particular class. Okay, they're not belonging or belong to a group of society. Rather, they've been found all over the demography. Most common people who are found under these things are under this abuse are like the ones who are in the relationship. That is either a formal relationship or a premature relationship. So the victims of domestic violence are not only of out of heterosexual relationships, that is the most common thing, but also it occurs in homosexual relationships as well. That's the main thing that has to be put here, because like violence can be of any form. If it is an extraterrestrial thing, we can just term it as terrorism. But as it happens inside the harmony of the family fraternity, it can be termed as domestic. So generally, it occurs between a husband and wife, a father and a child. It's very contemporary. And as per the data, majority of the people who are subjected to domestic violence are women. That's a sad part of it. And according to the UN data, nearly 21% to 28% women are abused uh, by their current or former partners, and 14 to 25% women are ever married report being raped by their husbands. So this arises the situation of pittiness, and the pity situation against women uh, are seen prevailing in a long span of time by the stand of gender inequality and predominance by the males. Research has established that there exists a direct significant correlation between a country's level of gender equality and rate of domestic violence. Where countries with less gender equality experience higher rates of domestic violence is being prevailed. Domestic violence is among the most underreported crimes worldwide in both male and female. Thing with domestic violence is the laws prevailing over in India are quite codified, but still, violence is always subjective. It always depends on the individual who's been subjected towards it. And moving on to furthermore aspects of it, the United Nations Population Fund found violence against women and girls to be most prevalent human right violation worldwide, stating that 1 in 3 women will be experiencing physical or sexual abuse in a lifetime. Violence against women tend to be less prevalent in developed Western nations and more normalized in the developing world. It's just because the Western nations have very strong prevailing laws against the domestic violence that are subjected against women. And there also lies the fact that men reported experiencing higher prevalence of all forms of violence, but reported experiencing lowest rate of sexual violence. Why women are always focused on more ways? Because they have been there is the state of dominance by the male over the female. But the thing with men reported being uh, a lot stages of violence are also being reported over there. When the male police found that, according to the National Crime Records Bureau, nearly 12,000 cases per year are filed for violence against men. But mostly men are feeling embarrassed to report these violences, as they feel something lower that happens to them, which is completely denied, and they should be entitled to their rights. And during adolescence, both girls and boys are likely to commit intimate partner violence, with both parties likely to force their partner into sexual activities. So this period can be stated as some the premature stage of relationship, where the sexual activities is intimated by the partner, sometimes forced, and that forcefulness against the will of one subjects to violence or subjects to cruelty, maybe. So it always depends on one presuming what's being occurring to her. If the presumption of one of it is violence, it is violence. If not, it's not. So moving to the next part of it, the children who are being subjected to the norms of domestic violence. And children who are living in the atmosphere of domestic violence live in an unpredictable situation dominated by fear. Because children are small human beings who are incapable of understanding the rational thinking. And it is mostly, most of them are being abused by their own parents. That's the sad thing that happens to them. These abuses happens against children are primarily caused due to the lack of parental care and guidance amongst them. Moving on to the next thing, we move on to the causes that cause domestic violence. Uh, Domestic violence is a choice that is learned behavior. For these reasons, it is difficult to say that domestic violence is caused by any one single factor. It is rather that we not being taught about domestic violence, but rather it is inculcated by our sanguinal practices. For example, if a child sees his father scolding his mother, that makes his presumption over that his father is always being dominant over his mother, and that attitude towards women prevails over him for his lifetime. So that needs to be corrected, rectified, and further moved on. And the broad classification of these causes can be said as the sense of entitlement, a belief they should have power and control over their partner, belief that they can get away with it, learned experience that being abusive gets them what they want, belief that their lives should take priority. And all these points can cannot be conclusive, as like there are many other causes that aren't being codified. Because if a husband subjects his wife to do the household work and against her will, that subjects to forceful restraint. So he's being abusive, showing his dominance over that he is not entitled to the household work. Rather, the woman should do it. That subjects to violence and abusingness. But if the woman considers that as a order of her husband and follows to do that, that will not be reported. And that's the case in most cases. And there are the specific factors that has been listed out for the causes of the domestic violence. It is the gender role identity, which mainly constitutes about the gender inequality that prevails over the land. Mainly, like we have this mass mentality of the male dominance over women over a long period of time, and there is the point now everyone should realize at the very specific entitlement is that each and every child should be taught gender should be a gender, not one gender is more dominant, another one is less. It is gender, just a classification. That's it. And the second main influence is family. Is a child learns his habits, inculcates his habits, his behavior, and his characters only by the hereditary natures of his family. So there must be prosperity and harmony amongst the family, and good deeds should be thought about the relationship needs, and each and everyone should learn to respect their opposite genders. And another part that influences this part is media, and media is being a good platform to portray good things as well as bad things. And as some of the medias portrays women as a woman as a bad object, still prevails over the period of time, which needs to be changed. And there is this set of peer groups and impunity. Some groups think that or just glorify that male are always the dominant ones. They are not entitled to do so. But the law never states it. But again, the impunity coming over, you can see it on a more general aspect that the laws prevailing on the land for these kind of things. Thing is, our country provides the domestic violence laws, but still we're not aware of it, and we're not aware of what really domestic violence is and how far it can be subjected to. And the furthermore part of the domestic violence will be discussed by furthermore friends.
Hello guys, I'm Pani and I've been dealing with a variety of issues, starting off with things that are not a cause of domestic violence. The reality is that which when you stop believing in it doesn't go away, meaning it is quite different from what we assume. So what we think is a source could merely be a symptom. So it's the case with domestic violence. Generally, when you are required to think of domestic violence, we feel that poverty, drugs, stress, etc. could be the causes. But these are basic catalysts, and the real causes are those which we saw earlier. Some more are the examples that are shown on the screen. So as I say, and as you observe, many, or for that matter, all humans have these issues, but not all are perpetrators of domestic violence. So these, according to me, are excuses. Now we move on to the effects. Newton said, every action has an equivalent opposite reaction. So for the actions of inflicting violence, there has to be an effect. My friend will be dealing with the legal effects, and I'll only be dealing as to how it affects the victims and others physically and mentally. Don't worry, non-enthusiast of physics, I won't bring any more physics here. Effect on victim. First off, we'll talk of violence. It causes death, illness or disability and injury, of course. Now coming to more serious issue, the psychological trauma. We humans are interconnected, meaning we all have an impact on each other. So if a victim has anger issues or depression issues, it won't start and end with the victim, but it can be contagious. So really devastating if the suicidal instincts are getting contagious. Homelessness. Nearly one-third of the people seeking help for homelessness services say domestic and family violence is an issue. And yeah, a default non-sensible useless means of being better, the alcohol and the narcotics. Effect on family. Family is the basic unit of society, traditionally consisting of two parents rearing their children. This definition seems too materialistic, at least according to me. Family also is made up of various emotional attachments like trust, well-being, etc. Domestic violence can destroy these hard yet fragile network. So, once broken, can never be attached. This might in turn lead to breakup of families. If this happens, the phrase rearing their children will mean nothing. We humans have been made to understand something very clearly, a posterior threshold, and if not possible, move away. This leads to the frequent moving to avoid the abuser, which in turn leads to the homelessness we talked about recently. Guys, I might seem a bit philosophical or emotional, but that's how the grave situation is. Effect on children. The saddest part. Children, if they are small and small enough not to understand the ruckus of domestic violence, then that is going to be affecting them. Childhood is the age where kids don't know what hate is. I'm talking about the societal hate here. This causes their great open world of positivity to collapse due to anxiety and even depression. Emotional distress, which leads them to being aggressive to their buddies at school. Children who doesn't know what's happening might feel that they are the cause of violence, and there are some really lame parents who really say that. I'll take an example of a kid who lives nearby my house. I remember him once saying that Appa said, has it not been me, he would never even bother to lift his eye up to the house. You can understand it from our perspective, which is actually okay because he's the sole reason for his father visiting the house. But does the same kid has that amount of intellect to know the intricacies of this? Underreporting. Domestic violence is one among the most underreported crimes worldwide. We are lawyers and at least prospective, so we need evidence and you will see that. Domestic violence is among the most underreported crimes worldwide for both men and women. Men tend to underreport their own perpetration of domestic violence, while women are most likely to underreport their victimization. Financial and familiar dependence, normalization of violence, and self-blaming were found to reduce of the likelihood. Now, I'll show you a graph which actually provides the evidence. This is a graph that shows how people seek to help other sources. I'm not going to talk in particular about lawyers or NGOs because because of the depressing percentage. Let's move to the none. 73.6% of some violence and 56.7% of severe violence is going underreported. The evidence that we talked about earlier. I actually personally don't appreciate the use of some and severe there. Violence is violence. So coming back, as we see, a clearly majority of the cases are going underreported. Now we'll move on to the causes of underreporting. Some seem pretty straightforward. Lack of acceptance by families, especially in case of girls, because in India, if a girl gets married, people generally tend to believe that she belongs to other house now. And now people who don't believe in this are the reporters of the cases, which we saw in the graph, the natal families. I don't know if you guys have observed that. Humiliation by police. We see in movies most of the times. Though movies are fictional, specifically with the fights aspect of it, coincidentally or wantedly, they tend to share some social evils. We sometimes see Coles misbehaving with wives who approach him to report her grievances. Retaliatory escalation of violence. Further, men report even lower cases because men are socialized not to express their feelings or see themselves as victims. Prevailing beliefs or stereotypes about men being the abusers. The abuse forced by men are not considered serious, or even for that matter, they're considered to be a joke. For example, a man walks into an office and tells his colleague that, no, no, what, bro, yesterday my wife slapped me. Seems funny, right? That's the problem. The feeling of fun is due to the above mentioned reasons. All this might make us wonder as to why don't they reasons are many. First off, the fear and inability of protecting forces to provide them long-term protection. Economical dependency, meaning not having a marketable job skill. Powerful inertia of socialization, which forces people to stay in relationship and making them highly resistant to change as a means of problem solving. People opinion to adjust and move on. In Telugu, we have a phrase here. We say, "Act sardukupovali." This literally translates to act, just need to adjust and move on. That does not work, guys. Okay, now my friend will be continuing on the legal aspects of it. Thank you.
So, hello everyone, I'm Shanmalar. So far, we saw what domestic violence is, its forms, causes, its effect on various people, and some reasons as why the victim doesn't leave the batterer. Now, let us have a look into the remedy provided by the legislature. It is nothing but the Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act 2005, which is enacted by the Parliament of India. This act gives a definition on domestic violence, which includes harming or injuring a woman in a domestic relationship, be it physical abuse, sexual abuse, verbal and emotional abuse, and economic abuse. Under this act, only a female can be a victim, and the respondents can be the adult male who has been in a domestic relationship with the aggrieved woman and male and female relatives of the husband or male partner. So here, not only the husband or the male partner is questioned into the violence, but also the relatives are brought into this. So once the victim informs the protection officer, she can file an application and make use of the government officials' duties towards her, and also she can make use of shelter homes, medical facilities, and counseling if necessary. The rights of the aggrieved person, as specified under this act, can be shortened and said like she can reside in the shared household. For her safety, protection orders shall be issued to the respondent. So the resident orders can be issued against the respondent whether he or she may stay or not. So monetary relief can be provided to the victim. Full custody of the children may be given to the victim with visiting hour for the respondent, penalty to the respondent for not following orders, and in case the protection officer doesn't take any action, he will be put under penalties. So the definition of domestic relationship is broad enough to cover all sorts of household arrangements. Especially it includes live-in relationships where the couple is not married. So the inclusion of this, as well as relationships which fall under categories of fraudulent or bigamous, was a pioneering step. So for the very first time in Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act 2005, the legislature has acknowledged live-in relationships by giving rights and protection to those females who are not legally married, but rather they are living with a male individual in a relationship, which is in the idea of marriage, additionally akin to wife, however not equivalent to wife. So Section 2F of the Domestic Violence Act 2005 defines domestic relationship. As per the definition, it is the relationship between two persons who live or have lived together at any point of time in a shared household. So in this relationship, they can be related by consanguinity, marriage, adoption. The family members might be living together as a joint family or through a relationship in the nature of marriage. So the live-in relationship is not categorically defined in the act like domestic relationship includes live-in relationship, but it is left to the courts for interpretation. By virtue of provision stated above, the court interpreted the expression relationship in the nature of marriage as live-in relationship. So the provisions of this act are presently made applicable to the individuals who are in live-in relationships. Courts presume live-in relationships to be covered under the ambit of the expression as the words nature of marriage and live-in relationship stand on the same line and meaning. So this gives women some basic rights to protect themselves from the abuse of fraudulent marriage and bigamous relationships. So with regard to live-in relationship itself, in a distinctive judgment passed in the case, it was decided that a child born out of a live-in relationship is entitled to property. That is, the property means which is owned by the parents but not the ancestor property. And this means that a woman and her child in a live-in relationship cannot be threatened with economic abuse. It is gratifying to know that children born out of relationships which are not akin to marriage can also have property rights. Additionally, the definition of child is also inclusive of foster, adopted, and stepchildren. So the respondent has a duty to pay the victim compensation and not cut off financial resources, and this protects the victim from not only violence but also protects her interests. The definition of shared household specifies that regardless of whether or not the victim has legal rights or equity over the household, if she has inhabited the house with the respondent and he or she has been violent with her, then the respondent is liable under the Act. This means that even if she does not have legal or financial stake in the house, the respondent cannot evict her. The protection orders are inclusive of most instances where the respondent could have possibly taken advantage of the victim. And again, it is not limited to that definition alone. Finally, the orders issued by the law should be given free of cost to the victims as proof. So now we can look the orders which a magistrate may pass under the act. Firstly, we could see the protection orders. So after giving an opportunity to the aggrieved person and respondent of being heard, and when the magistrate is satisfied that a prima facie case of domestic violence has taken place or is likely to take place, the magistrate can pass a protection order in favor of the aggrieved person, prohibiting the respondent from the following acts, such as committing any acts of domestic violence, aiding or abetting in the act of domestic violence, entering the place of employment of aggrieved person, or if the person is child, it may be school or any other place, attempting to communicate in any form, including personal, oral, or written, maybe electronic or telephonic contact, alienating any assets, operating bank account, bank locker held or enjoyed by both parties jointly or singly by the respondent, including her children, causing violence to the dependents or other relative or any other person who give the assistance to the aggrieved person, or committing any other act specified by the protection officer. So next we shall look into the residence orders. The magistrate being satisfied that a woman, the magistrate being satisfied that a domestic violence has taken place shall pass residence order like restraining the respondent from disposing or in any manner disturbing the peaceful possession of the shared household, or the magistrate shall direct the respondent to remove himself or herself from the shared household, shall restrain the respondent or his relatives from entering any portion of the shared household where the aggrieved person lives, and the respondent shall be restrained from alienating or disposing of the shared household or encumbering it, also shall restrain the respondent from renouncing his right in the shared household, and can direct the respondent to secure same level of alternate accommodation for the aggrieved person as enjoyed by her, or to pay rent for the same if the circumstances so require. So no order shall be made against women under this section. Magistrate may impose additional condition and pass any other order to protect the safety of the aggrieved person or her child. Magistrate is also empowered to order direction to the concerned station house officer of the police station to give protection to the aggrieved person to assist in implementing his order. Magistrate may also impose on the respondent to direct Sridhan or any other property or valuable security she is entitled to receive. The next relief we could see is the monetary relief. So the magistrate may direct the respondent to pay monetary relief to meet the expenses of the aggrieved person and any child as a result of domestic violence, and such relief include loss of earnings, medical expenses, loss caused due to destruction or removal or damage of any property, pass order as to maintenance for the aggrieved person as well as her children if any. The magistrate may, in addition to provide an order of maintenance under section 125 of the Criminal Procedure Code or under any other law. The quantum of relief shall be a fair, reasonable, and consistent with the standard of living to which the aggrieved person is accustomed to. Magistrate can order a lump sum amount also. On failure of the respondent to make payment of this order, magistrate shall order employer or debtor of the respondent to directly pay to the aggrieved person or to deposit in the court a portion of the salary or wage due to the respondent. So custody orders. Magistrate can grant temporary custody of any child or children to the aggrieved person or to the person making application on her behalf and specify the arrangements for visit of such child by the respondent. Magistrate can even refuse the visit of such respondent in such a case if it may be harmful to the interest of the child. So finally, it's the compensation order. The magistrate may pass order directing the respondent to pay compensation to the petitioner for injuries, including mental torture and emotional distress caused by the acts of domestic violence which is committed by the respondent. Copies of such orders can be passed by the magistrate at free of cost to the parties concerned and police officer and service provider. So any relief available under this act may also be sought in any other legal proceedings before a civil court, family court, or criminal court, and such relief may be sought in addition to the relief sought for in a suit or legal proceedings before civil or criminal court. Now so far we saw about the Domestic Violence Act. We have several other laws related to domestic violence. So there are several laws protecting a married woman from abuse from her husband or her husband's relatives. So Article 21 of the Indian Constitution provides protection of life and personal liberty to every citizen. Under Section 498A of the Indian Penal Code, harassment for dowry by the husband or his family is considered a crime. This harassment can be either mental or physical. Even though marital rape is not recognized as a crime in India, forced sex with one's wife can be considered cruelty under this section. Section 498A has a wide scope. It also covers any and all willful conducts against the women which drive the women to commit suicide or grave injury or risk to life, limb, or overall health. Again, health includes the mental and physical health of the women. So the practice of dowry itself is outlawed under the Dowry Prohibition Act 1961. Despite this, if dowry has been given to and taken by anyone other than the women, she is entitled to that money or property as the case may be under this act. And finally, we have section 504 of IPC, which prevents the intentional use of abusive language. Someone going against this can be punished through imprisonment for 2 years or fine or may even include both. From here on, my friend will continue. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, guys. And I think my friends have already covered the important topics and the legal backing and aiding for the topic domestic violence. And now I will be covering the other basic concept, that is the procedure to actually file a complaint or file a case under domestic for domestic violence in India. And also I'll be covering the important topic which we all must be aware of this particular situation, that is the impact of COVID-19 on families in relation to the domestic violence. Okay, fine. Let us get into the topic. Procedures of domestic violence cases. The first step is to file a complaint. Okay, first of all, what is a complaint? A complaint is generally a written document, right? And that complaint should contain the facts of the case, relief sought by the complainant, and all the personal details of the parties involved in that particular case. And it should be presented, it should be submitted before the CJM or the magistrate by the complainant. In rarest of rare circumstances, court can pass ex parte order at this stage itself after listening to the arguments of the complainant side and perusing any documents filed by the complainant on affidavit. Ex parte order is nothing but it's generally order that has been sentenced in favor of one particular party, but that won't occur often in court. It is of the rare circumstances it happens. The next step is to calling for DIR. DIR is nothing but domestic incident report. It is the report that the court orders the officers to make after the court scrutinizes the complaint. Most often, this procedure is followed in Delhi, and in certain states, the DIR is not immediately called by the court. And most often, the DIR have been done only after the court hears both the arguments of the complainant and respondent. In rare cases, the court files the DIR, directs the officer to file the DIR only by hearing to the arguments of the complainant. And the third point is protection officer meets the complainant. As I already said, the protection officer calls the complainant for preparation of DIR and sends the same to the concerned court for perusal. And the step 4 is notice to the respondents. The court, after producing the DIR report and complaint issues, issues notice to the other parties, that is the respondent, and directs them to file their reply, or in case it does not find any merit in complaint, it may dismiss the complaint on that hearing itself. But this is of rarest possibility, and generally the court will issue a notice to the respondent. And the fifth point is reference to mediation. And here both parties to the complaint, when appear next or directed by the court to appear for mediation in all of the cases at Delhi, and efforts by the mediator are made and the efforts of the mediator are made to reconcile them at first. And the sixth point is mediation proceedings. If the mediation proceedings after being conducted by the court are successful, then the matter stands settled. If the mediation proceedings end in failure, then the court proceeds with the matter. And the seventh point is reply and rejoinder. Once the reply is filed and the mediation fails, the complainant is directed to file his rebuttal or rejoinder to the reply filed by the opposite party. In Delhi, the court also asks parties to furnish income affidavits pursuant to the guidelines of the Delhi High Court. And the step 7, decision on interim maintenance. The court decides application for interim maintenance and other certain interim reliefs at this stage of the case after listening to the arguments from both the sides. But this interim maintenance will be binding only till the case ends, but not after that, because it is not the final judgment. And the 8th point is framing of issues. The court then proceeds further and frames issues charged for adjudications, and the matter is posted for evidence of the parties. Step 9, complainant's evidence. Okay, the complainant is directed to lead its evidence by way of filing affidavit along with relevant documents, papers, etc., and by summoning all its witnesses. Step 10, respondent's evidence. The respondent is asked to lead its evidence by way of filing. The same procedure has been followed in case of respondent also. Is asked to lead its evidence by way of filing of the relevant documents, papers, and by summoning all its witnesses. And the step 11, final arguments. The final arguments in the matter are held and the matter is decided by the court. And the last step is the final judgment, that is the final order. The court passes the final order judgment or judgment where it may grant all or some of the relief as sought in the complaint or dismiss the complaint in entirety. Okay. And let's move on to the next topic, that is the impact of COVID-19 on families. Fine. This COVID-19 and that is the novel coronavirus have introduced us a new concept, that is quarantine, which means an extreme form of social distancing, which in almost all the countries in the world are implementing lockdown to practice this method, which in turn has increased the number of domestic violence cases. Spending more time with an individual will surely lead to a lot of arguments. Especially for women, the lockdown has led to a significant increase in the work burden. Working hours have been increased as more family members are at home, which results in an increase in stress and restlessness. This triggers them to burst at their housemates who put forward an argument. These many days, the solution to these small arguments were loneliness. The state of loneliness which we create because of maintaining distance from the other person, we argued to prove it proves their worth, hence we again accept each other. But during this lockdown situation, all the family members are put under the same roof. We don't have time to do that, because of which continuous arguments leads to domestic violence acts. The primary motive is to show superiority or to dominate the other through means of argument, which later leads to such violent activities. During the lockdown, these arguments arise mainly due to the unavailability of basic needs. Everyone is not equally provided with basic resources. Rich people enjoy these lockdowns with loads of money in their bank accounts, whereas the poor people, on the other hand, are struggling in need of proper food, medical facilities, shelter, etc. And it is practically impossible to lead a life peacefully without having the money required to fulfill our basic needs. Daily wage workers, for example, daily wage workers, hotel workers, and almost all the privately owned company workers are not provided with salaries because there's no work for them during this lockdown. Without an income for 2 to 3 months, it is highly challenging for these people to survive. These problem and misery pave the way for arguments which at times exceed the limit and lead to these abusive activities. Thousands of migrant workers have not been able to travel. And no, before slide, bro. Okay. Thousands of migrant workers have not been able to travel to their hometowns. Peace amongst these families is literally lost. Loss in privacy is also a reason for these activities. Every single person needs their own private space. But this quarantine make it impossible, as everyone is under the same roof the entire day. A lot of arguments begin when there is a problem for their private space, which at last leads to such violent behavior. The whole country is under lockdown, but our government has unlocked liquor shops for an inappropriate reason in order to boost our country's economy. And this looks so ludicrous because drugs and alcohol also play a major role in domestic violence actions. An alcoholic person is unconscious of his speech and actions. A drunken individual will have less chance of controlling their violent behavior towards the other partner. There are some of the major reasons for domestic violence activities. If this situation continues, then after the lockdown and the coronavirus pandemic are resolved, the courts are accepted to be flooded with hundreds of domestic violence and divorce cases. And let us move to the next topic, that is the solution to cease domestic violence activities. What steps can we take to reduce these kind of activities? Okay, the government should properly educate every individual about domestic violence and increase the degree of punishment to the abuser and protection of to the abuser and protect the victim. Based on the increase in domestic violence activities data collected by the All India Council of Human Rights, Liberty and Social Justice, the Delhi court questioned the Delhi Commission for Women (DCW) for an immediate solution. The National Commission for Women (NCW) under the Ministry of Women and Child Development Department officially announced a 2.5 times increase in domestic violence activities and has been implemented the one-stop center scheme. Under this scheme, all the services are made available to the public who are seeking protection and care. The department also stated that 24/7 helplines are in effect to immediately rescue victim once the complaint is filed. And by now we have reached the end of the session. And here are some important NGOs and helpline numbers that has been listed in the slide for your site. Have a look on it. And women in distress can call the 1091, Women Helpline Domestic Abuse, and National Commission for Women, Child Helpline, National Human Rights Commission, All India Women's Conference, Lawyers Collective Human Rights, and SNEGA NGOs number. And hereby we are concluding that I think this could be the better conclusion for this topic, because the only way we can prevent the domestic violence is only if we spread awareness among people, educate everyone properly. And I think unless we change, we cannot bring a change in a society, or we cannot inculcate a new ideas in the society unless we adapt to it. So we must try to change, and we educated people should try to educate and make aware the underprivileged, uneducated, needy, and poorful people, so that they won't perform these kind of violent activities in future. Thank you, and I thank the coordinator and the OEF team for giving us a good time to present the right topic at the right time. Thank you.
Thank you all.
So, we wholeheartedly thank who all are present in this webinar. We actually thank your patience and your gratitudeness for staying this long, just to listening us speak about what the glimpse we know about domestic violence, because as it remains very subjective, and these can just give you a glimpse of what is domestic violence and the ideologies that it prevails over the time, and few laws that are